Yeah, this is John and All Points TV, and today we're sitting down talking Laurel Federbush, and this woman is like kind of, I think, is really kicking butt as being an author. I mean, this is like her fifth or sixth book coming out now. You even
My
lost
books
count.
are all really short. So.
Yeah, they're more like a pamphleteer, but I mean,
Yeah.
I think this is one that really kind of fits that kind of that label. I think is it's the title is the under prescription of antibiotics for the elderly, and this comes out of a personal experience for you, doesn't it?
Yes, and even though it's just from my personal experience, I can deduce that it's a widespread problem because it happened for me and my mother at a major hospital in this area, a very major internationally acclaimed hospital, and also at the rehab facility where, subsequent to the hospital, and among many doctors too. And if that many people at major institutions, with a good reputation, are willing to go along with this, what I consider an unconscionable thing, I assume that that's happening, in a widespread way all across the country or the world. And the thing is, doctors being unwilling to prescribe antibiotics for the elderly, when they know that that's the only treatment for their problem and that the person is guaranteed to, their health is guaranteed to go downhill without the antibiotics. I'm not going to speculate on what the motivation is, if it's a good motivation or a sinister motivation, but the effect is that people are ending up being, their health is deteriorating, they're maybe being put in nursing homes and unnecessarily and just not able to function, and their health is deteriorating, until their death, and they could have a good quality of life if they were given the appropriate antibiotic treatments for the illnesses that they have.
Now, some people are saying, there's a big move afoot to like the alternative medicine people have suggested it, and there's some evidence that indicates you might be on the right track for certain issues, that there's a over-prescribing of antibiotics. And, right now, I don't know if you're aware of this too, the FDA just banned certain types of antibacterial soaps. Mm-hmm. Because they are now, they were questioning and seeing if they weren't all that effective. But, I can see.
I'm sure that's true, that there are areas where antibiotics are overused, and that would be a good example. These antibiotic soaps you see everywhere that are not necessary. And another place would be maybe the way that they raise animals on some of these farms. They raise them in horribly unsanitary conditions, and they use antibiotics to keep the animals, try to keep them healthy even in these unhealthy conditions. And of course those antibiotics are, get into the people's bodies when they eat the meat, and so there are areas where antibiotics are overused. There might be a whole host of other areas too, but I would say that if someone is desperately sick and needs antibiotics to treat them, even if it's an elderly person, I don't see that would be any different from anyone else, that person, if that person is given antibiotics, that's exactly what antibiotics are for. That's not an overuse of them. That's what their purpose is. So.
Well, I just want to make sure that clarify that, because some people are saying, well, there's an overuse of them, and in certain instances I could agree on that, and that's the reason I brought up the antibacterial soaps.
Right.
I think basically you came on board and you did a book on about against abortion, and this tendency to disregard or wanting to marginalize elderly, I see it as kind of connected to this kind of blasé attitude about abortion. I mean, and I think there might be a connection. How do you see it?
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that occurred to me too. Well, we've heard of. There was someone who was known recently for writing a book about something about life, and I guess the philosophy was that the very young and the very old, they shouldn't get very much in terms of health care. Health care should be focused on, people within the middle range, not the very young or the very old. But I don't know if that person is the only one with that attitude. I think that that's probably a widespread attitude, that the very young, so young that they're in the womb even, maybe maybe even like newborns or, young children, maybe they would fall into the same category, that their lives aren't considered as valuable. And then at the other extreme is the elderly, and that their lives are not considered valuable, and that the resources should be put, in the middle range. And I guess I don't see that as an acceptable way of viewing people. So
I think there is something kind of, and there's something kind of amiss in our society that we kind of have this cavalier attitude towards life. I mean, and I don't want to get people saying you can't. I've always come back. I'm not anti-abortion, like go out protest and hang out up signs. I always question. I've known several women in my growing up, several girls I grew up with that had several abortions, and you'd like to say you could extend this kind of like, well, it's a mistake, and they're going to be saddled with a child, and so you can understand that. But after it happens several times, it's like you're just exasperated. It's just like, well, don't you understand the connection between sexual activity and procreation? I mean, it just doesn't seem like I could buy into this excuse that they didn't know what was doing, or they didn't fully aware they could get pregnant the first time after having sex the first time. I mean, I never bought into all that stuff. So I mean, basically, and the best thing you do is you don't judge anybody, but you just don't become part of the problem. But I mean, I just think there's a kind of a rather, I'm just seeing this trend towards kind of disregarding life is pretty scary. I mean, you hear it coming from the scientific perspective, like everything is totally disregarded. Any ethical and moral considerations just got to be give way for the pragmatic ones. Well, we're human, okay? I mean, we're not very practical anyway. I mean, the whole idea of us, we are a consuming species, we are a destructive species, but I don't know where, I don't, just because this one group says that, it's almost like they're saying, it's kind of a form of elitism, like we can tell you how pathetic you are.
Right.
But but when the gun's pointed at your head, you're not going to sit there and quiver? I mean, that's what I like to know. They're so detached.
Right, exactly.
I like to see how that when the tables are turned on them. Yeah,
you get I've had this experience, and probably some of your viewers, I expect, would have had it too, of doctors just talking about old people. Like, if you go in to try to get medical care for an elderly relative, or maybe I'm not sure if they would talk this way to the elderly person himself, but if you're being the advocate or the power of attorney person for this elderly person, and them say, older, not even older people, old people are like that, In my mom's case, she's had recurring urinary tract infections, and one of the problems with that is, at least lately, has been delirium. So instead of trying to figure out the cause of the delirium, trying to treat that cause, it's, old people are like that. Old people get that way in hospitals. Just these very general statements. Old people's health, gets worse. They just. There's no emphasis on what's true of this specific person. Whatever their sweeping statements they're saying about old people might not apply in this particular case, but they can just get away with these very general attitudes. And I don't think that would apply if they were talking about women. Like if you went in for some gynecological problem, say, women have that problem. That's, and it comes along it's not just the words, it's the kind of attitude that they display along with those words. Just this very, not caring, detached. And I really don't think, I know that senior citizens groups have been a very powerful organizing force in a lot of ways, and, kind of intimidating to politicians in a number of areas. I would really like to see them get on these kinds of issues, and I'm not sure that they are, so.
Well, my mom always said, too, that she found that she would always contend that she would go to a doctor for different things and, ailments. And a lot of times they were pretty dismissive, she thought, because she was a woman. And I think that's, and actually she would even say some of the women doctors she had were also dismissive about women's complaints. Would you think that might be a factor as well? Because your mom is a woman and you're a woman, and most of the medical. Yeah.
Well, that occurred to me. Like I'm the one who lives close to or actually live with my mom. I have a brother who lives in Arizona. I often wonder if it were my brother instead of me, if the doctors would feel so comfortable with just completely disregarding my expressed wishes. That she get treatment for not just palliative care. I want the if she has infections, I want them actually treated. They just, very brazenly disregard my wishes. And I'm not so sure that they would do that with, with a man, or, maybe if I were, a more aggressive kind of person, or, I guess I think I have been kind of aggressive in this way, but maybe if it were a very aggressive man, maybe like a lawyer or an attorney kind of seeming man, maybe they wouldn't feel so cavalier about just completely, running roughshod over what we want.
Yeah, because like I said, it's a very possible. I mean, we have a tendency to think that medicine is a form of science. And some people call it the arts, because it's kind of like you have science, but it only goes so far, and the application of all these elements, creates the art of medicine. But I do think that there's, even in so-called scientific circles, there's a tendency to disregard a certain portion of the population's input or feelings or observations. Mm-hmm. And I just don't see how. I mean, I question why, if they always claim that they're being scientific. I just have an issue with if disregarding information is at all scientific. I don't know if it lends itself to being considered, the scientific process, or methodology.
I think that a lot of the information that people are being given out, like I was saying about delirium, is actually incorrect information. I mean, I'm not sure that it's that the scientists don't know what the truth is. I think that the doctors are giving information that's convenient and self-serving for them, to the patients and their families. Example that, delirium, I think, is a widespread problem for the elderly. Just being told, oh, this is the new normal for that person, even if the person was very highly functioning before, they went to the hospital to be treated. Once they're in the hospital, if they start explaining delirium, having the doctors, oh, this is their new normal, because that's the way delirium is. And it's really just that the doctors don't feel like treating them for the infections that they have. So instead of giving them a treatment that would make them not delirious anymore, just saying, oh, that's just the way they're going to be from now on. If they get worse and worse, it's, instead of giving them treatment, say, oh, it's just that being in the hospital makes people delirious. And, even though there may be some truth to that, presenting that as if that were the entire truth, or as if being treated wouldn't get rid of some of the delirium, just saying, the doctors come up with all kinds. They want to get the older person out of the hospital, I guess, so that they, if the person dies, they won't be sued for malpractice or something. So they really want to get you to take the person out of the hospital. So say that, they're telling you that the longer they staying in the hospital, the worse their condition is going to get. So, get them out of here. It's really that they're not treating them properly, but they're giving you this sort of very self-serving information that it's the hospital stay itself that is causing the problems. And so I guess I'm very suspicious at this point of the information we're being given. In my mother's case, I think every time she's gotten delirious, it's been connected with having these urinary tract infections, or sometimes recently she's gotten blood infections, unfortunately. And usually the doctors have been willing to treat it, but run into certain of the doctors in the infectious diseases department who have not been willing to give her treatment, and that's the problem that I'm addressing here. So this is not every doctor all the time, but certain doctors with sway have been unwilling to treat the infections, and so it's always connected with these infections. And then there are some other factors, like dehydration can sometimes can bring on the delirium, or having to go to the bathroom really badly, or, she happens to have this, urinary retention, and that can play a part in it too. So all of these things are related, but it's always a physical thing. And, certain medications can, and I'm sure this is true of other people too, these are some of the things that can cause delirium in anyone, certain reactions to medications. But there's always a cause to it, and once that cause is identified and remedied, then the delirium goes away. I don't know if that's true for everyone all the time, but I suspect that that's true for a whole bunch of people who right now are just being dismissed as, oh, well, this is their new normal. So no one's even bothering to find out what could be the cause of it. And no one is even bothering to try to fix it, whereas the person could be living, resuming their normal life outside of the hospital or care and rehabilitation or nursing home. They could be living the way they were before if they were treated properly.
Yeah, and then I think it's like I think you did a good, healthy approach to this too. You had this issue, and you feel like your mom's being disregarded, or her needs are being disregarded, and you went and you wrote this pamphlet, this book, and I think that I'd like to see, maybe hear back. I don't know how you'd feel about it, maybe, but if we can get healthcare professionals maybe to agree to sit down and talk and address some of the stuff you maybe bring up in your book, or you want to bring out in the open, would you be open to sit down and talk to healthcare professionals if they're willing to sit down with you?
Yeah, and I have no doubt that they could point out some specific doctrine or some page of some essay or something that would justify what's being done. I'm sure that they have all of their answers laid out. Like one of the doctors told me, the reason we're doing it is because your mother's getting resistant to antibiotics, and if she were to have some kidney failure or something, we would want to have all kinds of antibiotics to treat her. And I question that for one thing, because she is actually very she always reacts well to antibiotics. I mean, maybe on some test or other they would say she's, this antibiotic isn't performing as well as it should, but nonetheless, she always reacts well to antibiotics. So even if there were some off point of resistance to antibiotics, I would seriously question that, she's at that level where they absolutely have to cut off antibiotics. The other thing is, if her health deteriorates from them not treating her, then her health is being compromised right now, so they're causing problems for her right now. So, even though there might be some hypothetical situation in the future that they're looking at, I'm looking at the present, and right now her health, would be continuing to get worse and worse, and these infections are not benign. Another thing that doctors, I think, are dishonest with people about is symptoms. One of the things I came across is they talk about urinary tract infections with no symptoms, and that those should not be treated. But the way they define symptom, they can play around with the definitions of symptoms. Like, I know that with my mom's infections, she'll often get like high sugar readings, she's diabetic, and also high blood pressure. What the doctors will do is just treat give her more insulin or give her more drugs to reduce her blood pressure, and act as if those are not symptoms of the infection, as if that's something completely unrelated, so that would not be considered a symptom. And the delirium, they're already not considering a symptom because, she could be delirious for any other number of reasons. So, any symptom she has, they're completely disregarding. Maybe there would be some that they would pay attention to, like if she had a fever or some white blood cell count. There are certain things, so if it's the most life-threatening infection in the world, maybe they would treat it, but you'd want to treat an infection before it gets to the point of being life-threatening, and so they play games about, what are symptoms. They dismiss the symptoms that someone has and then say that they have no symptoms. And the other thing is the definition of an infection. Like in the hospital, one person would tell me she had an infection, and someone else would say she doesn't have an infection. And it's possible one of the people was actually lying. That's a possibility. But it could also be that they just have, their definition of what they define as an infection. Like, like I said, if it's the most life-threatening infection in the world, maybe they would define it as an infection. But if it's a more usual kind of infection, they would just say it's not an infection. So I think they can play around with the definitions of what is an infection and what isn't a symptom. So I think that those are ways they can be dishonest with their patients and their families. So.
Well, anyway, I think this book probably, your observations probably are similar to the situation that other people have found themselves in. And, that again, that's going to, hope that, that they have that kind of experience too. maybe we can make them aware of this book, and maybe they can start seeing from your. This is largely kind of account of your own personal, you and your mom's personal dealings with the doctors, cops. I'm talking to a lot of people about the issues here in Flint now, but is this more personal? I mean, or is it? Do you have any statistics on a national or from journals?
No, I don't. Except that, as I said, I think that I can assume that this is happening on a very widespread level because they just feel so brazen about doing what they're doing at a major hospital. So many people are going along with it, and if this were something, the lawyer, I've talked to some lawyers trying to get legal help, and they all seem, well, why don't you just take her out of this rehab place if you don't think she's getting good care, just take her somewhere else. Well, if someone has delirium, you can't really take them out and just move, because they have delirium. That's, I don't know if, it's sort of like someone with Alzheimer's. You can't just take someone with Alzheimer's home with you. And I'm not enough of, I'm not qualified to say what's the difference between delirium and Alzheimer's. The things I know are that delirium has a sudden onset, or it can go away suddenly. It's not some something that comes on and gets worse and worse. It's not a gradual thing. So that's one thing I know is delirium is sudden. It comes suddenly and it can leave suddenly. I don't know what the other differences are. But anyway, if someone has delirium, it's not safe to just bring them home with you. And, it's someone who has no concept of reality and is a danger to themselves or other people. And then take them somewhere else. Well, I don't know if another hospital would be better. Maybe, I would have assumed that any hospital would, give their patients the best treatment. But at this point, I don't know. Maybe an older person, they just don't want to give them the best treatment. So it's kind of risky to take someone out of that environment and without knowing that they're going to. Get better. So, but anyway, the lawyers just didn't want to touch. It's not they didn't want to touch it. They just, shrugged it off. They didn't see anything. Well, if you must like that place, otherwise you would take her out of it. It's just not a helpful attitude. And they, I think that if this were something that were completely startling to them, they would have wanted, to take the case or something. But it just didn't seem that unusual to them or anything, so I assume that it's a pretty common thing then. So, if the lawyers didn't see it as unusual, then I assume it's not unusual, so.
Anyway, so I just hope hopefully that, hopefully it's not as widely experienced as it seems to be, but what you're telling me, what I've heard from you is, I've heard of other people having very similar responses. I mean, and when you bring up the, what you think is lacking in the care of a loved one in these kind of facilities, they have a tendency to, it happened with my own mother. Matter of fact, she had a bed sore that my friends who are nurses said there's no excuse for, because of this lack of good nursing care. And she wasn't a person that the money was like an issue for the center. The money was there for her to be treated, to be cared for, and they still didn't do it. And it was very disappointing. It was a contributing factor to her death. It really was. And it's, and I think it's really what you don't want to cast dispersions on the entire medical profession. But there are people out there who are not good practitioners. And or even if this is a systemic thing, shouldn't this be examined to see if this is the healthiest, the most intelligent, the most humane thing to do? And from the sound of it, doesn't sound like to me it is. But like I said, I think it's all too widespread, and I'm glad you are deciding to bring your experience to this and say, why don't we examine this more? But anyway, the books is under prescription of antibiotics for the elderly.
It should be out October 1st. It's not out yet, but hopefully October 1st, or if not, then very shortly after.
I had under prescription spelled wrong, so I will notice that. I have noticed that, and I had changed it, people, so if you're going to say that, I had a scrolling banner. I checked it twice. That just shows human error, but anyway, this is one of several books you have out there through Amazon for Kindle, and also they can buy a hard copy of this, too, as well, right? Is this one going to
be? Yeah, either Kindle or paperback. Yeah.
And this is another subject. This is like you have one on the flat Earth theory. You have one about about the matriarchs of the Bible being what their position would have been towards abortion, which is quite good. And you have there's like 5 or 6 plus the life on the guest list, which is one I haven't read yet. That's one I'm thinking about trying next, but I'll definitely look at this one too. Anyway, and also the harp playing, you can entertain. You can book Laurel through Rush Entertainment, and that's it's rushentertainment.com, RUSCH entertainment.com, and they can book her for your events. And also, so you're kind of this kind of Renaissance woman there. I mean, so anyway, we're going to wrap this up there. But anybody who if anybody wants to relate to this and hearing this, can they get through you through Facebook, obviously, right?
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, well, maybe this could be a catalyst for a great conversation here in this country. So I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
Have a good one.